to prison. But the problem is that like, why did they start like now? You know, like why did they choose to prosecute him? You know, like that's the problem that's not really being addressed. What was behind that decision? You know, like for like obviously the case was obviously less severe than like Eric Garner, where the cop was using an illegal chokehold.
There's video
when it
footage.
was banned. There's video footage, and it was clearly a crime was being committed there, but he was never prosecuted. But the Peter Leon case is murky enough to the point where it could be completely accidental, and we don't know.
And a lot of them don't know like some of the facts surrounding the case. So like, Officer Liang, after he fired the shot and it ricocheted off the wall and hit a Kai, he texted his union rep, not the ambulance. He never called for medical assistance. It was her name is Kim, the woman that Akai was with, and she was trying to perform CPR through the instructions of her neighbor on the phone because ex-officers Peter Liang and ex-officer Sean Landau, they were just like, well, there's somebody dying, but we're not gonna help them.
Yeah.
Like, okay, weird. Very weird. I don't know why you call your union rep as a way to like, hey, how do I get out of this deep shit that I got myself into? Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of them don't know that, and when you do bring up the fact that Officer Liang made no act for medical assistance to call an ambulance right away as a first instinct, they're like, oh yeah, that actually sounds like pretty terrible. Like,
because that's the nature of the case.
What if the agreement is that it was completely accidental? I think both sides agreed to that.
I mean, it could be.
Some people don't think so.
Yeah, some people, especially, I guess, they
think it was a racial killing.
Yeah, it could be like we don't know, right? That's something we'll never know because that's something that only happened in that alleyway.
It's useless trying to argue that.
There's no point arguing that, but the point is that there's ambiguity in this case, as opposed to certain cases where there was much less ambiguity, and so why did this one? Why did this cop get prosecuted over all those other cops? That's the big issue I have, and nobody's really addressing the thought process behind that decision.
There are so many emotions packed into the case.
Is this
there's such a strong divide, and I understand where some people are coming from because they're just mad that an Asian officer is the first officer in 11 years to be indicted and then sentenced. But his sentencing is another story because he didn't get any jail time. He only had community service hours, which is a lot of bullshit. And we're very upset about that.
Alright, so what about that idea that I was just saying to you, Justin, that I think what a lot of the counter-protesters are saying is that they agree that it's awful that, these officers keep getting away with it, but just because he might seem like a scapegoat, and maybe is a scapegoat, doesn't mean that the Asian community should want to be a part of that system.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
What do you mean by that?
They shouldn't enjoy the same. They shouldn't be privileged to not go to prison. They should go to prison. But
everybody should go to prison.
And there was this video that everybody loved to share in prison. It was a gotcha. It was this activist. I forget what her name is. I think it was Jessie or something, and she was just we don't want the same kind of privilege as white people. This is not why we're fighting for this issue. This is not about that. And I'm is it though? I mean, you guys are expecting to get away with something that historically white officers have been getting away with. I don't understand why you're trying to level yourself with that same kind of why are you siding with your oppressor? They don't give a shit about you. It's the issue. And
yeah, no, the conspiracy theorist in me does believe that this is a carefully calculated move, because if you divide, minorities now need to be able to stand with and understand each other's struggles now more than ever. Classic war tactic, right? Like you said, divide and conquer. Once the different sects have their conflicts have come out into the open, then you have problems.
Yeah.
But it needs to be
the dominant
overcome.
race or the dominant power kind of relieves itself of that duty to solve the issue because they've pitted people against each other.
Exactly.
That sentiment, I feel Asian people ignore from like black communities. When black communities are trying to tell like Asian communities like, hey, this is our injustice that we're experiencing every day, and when Asian people are like super uncomfortable because you're like they have real stories. They're trying to tell you how much they're suffering, and why aren't you listening and reacting in a way that would support them? But
What has been shown.
I think that there does exist kind of at its core a fundamental kind of similarity in that both communities are being slighted by both communities perceive that they're being slighted by like the system as a whole, and obviously they're kind of to very different extents. Like, you know, what the African American community has to face is very different from the Asian American community, but at the core of this case both are being slighted, and so and unfortunately like kind of the differences between two communities have generated a big rift between the two in this case. But I think at the core of it, both are minorities being minorities in America and like getting, facing a very normal minority problem that's like not getting justice that they perceive that they should get.
We basically have a long history of our ties with police violence. Actually, the way we were founded was because of an incident of police violence. The case for Young Chi Kwang was a 16-year-old boy in Brooklyn, and he was playing with a BB gun in his backyard, and his neighbors called the cops on him, and then they shot him in the back of his head, like point blank. And the cop never had any repercussions or anything. And basically, the first people to stand with the family were Black and Latino communities, because they've been experiencing police violence for forever.
That's exactly what just happened to me, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's our origin story.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and so I guess how that kind of ties with the Kai Gurley stuff is that the sister of Young Chi Kwang she actually released a statement at one point because she was I don't want to quote her or anything because I don't remember. But she was just trying to call out the Asian community for being well, you weren't there when my brother was killed, but these people, the Black and Latino community was, and it doesn't make sense for you guys to try to support Officer Liang at all, really.
Basically, what I'm saying is comparing the experiences of different minorities and the oppression of different minorities is useless and doesn't address or help any problems. Saying Asian people are not trying to say oh, we're more oppressed, or even saying we're oppressed too, because we know that Asian Americans do experience a lot of different discrimination. And the whole model minority myth, while it does benefit, there's so many harms of the model minority myth that white people will never understand, black people will never understand, Latinos will never understand, no one else but Asian.
Yeah, there are a lot of expectations. I guess as an Asian American, when you, especially I feel in an academic setting, for the longest time you're always expected to do well, and if you don't do well, there's a huge amount of shame that comes with it, and mental health is also a really huge issue, because I feel it negatively affects mental health. It makes you feel super inadequate, super terrible about yourself, super inferior.
So what is so damaging about it is this culture and the stereotypical assumption of white people that they make these snap judgments about Asians, you got oh, of course they always get good grades, oh, they're always just going to be the same person. That's the biggest racism again, or I shouldn't say the biggest, that's one big aspect of racism and discrimination against Asian Americans, is that everyone thinks that
So it's a myth to keep Asians above the rest of the community, but also below, so that they'll never be able to achieve as much as they want.
And the thing is, there's a limit to it as well, because look at all the leaders of corporations and banks in America. They're not Asians, even though it's the stereotype of model minority, that the Asians are the smartest or whatever. But there's the glass ceiling that they can't get past because the white oppression stays in power, and they want to stay in power.
I guess white friends, you just can't be throwing out like like how you see things, and then they're just like, why are you playing the race card? Why are you making it really uncomfortable for us to like live here? And you're just like, well, this is my experience and this is how I've been living it like every single day. What do you mean? I'm sorry that it's inconvenient for you right now, but it's inconvenient for me every day. So
I mean, I think it's one of the things that you have to like kind of understand growing up. You have to adjust growing up, because at the end of the day, as ideal it would be to have a world where everybody can understand your problems and your cultural kind of background. That's just not a realistic kind of mentality, and you have to kind of deal with the fact that people are gonna not understand, you know, and so like if you don't pick that fight, you know, like you can kind of let it slide and you can live your life normally. But you know, I think ideally we would exist in a world where everybody kind of is understanding of like the different cultural differences between each other.
So, did you read Du Bois?
Yeah.
You know his whole thing about like the double consciousness, where like as like kind of like a minority in the country, you're kind of forced to think in two different mindsets.
It's absolutely true. He hit the nail on the head.
Really? Do you feel the same way? Like
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, like
because you're first generation, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in LA in a very Asian neighborhood. You know, not necessarily with only immigrant family,
right?
Immigrant generation children, but also with, you know, first generation, second generation, and third generation people. But even within that community of Asians of varying kind of levels of what you could call whiteness, like there is definitely a kind of a dual layer that exists. And for example, when I'm in New York, I act in a very different manner, you know, towards people. Like, because
you're just surrounded by.
Yeah, because it's completely different once you're out of that community, and you know, like the way I talk, the mannerisms I have, you know, the topics I can kind of talk about, they're different. So there certainly exists this like dichotomy, you know, and like it's mindsets. Yeah, mindsets are definitely.
So it goes really.
It's a different.
It's like a different identity then, like a.
I think so. I think there's probably two me's.
That's really crazy.
Like the Asian American side and the more American side. You know. Americanness to me is in a sense the loss of my Asian identity, and so that's how I characterize it.
I feel like I'm a little too disconnected with like my culture, especially language-wise. I feel like if you can't communicate with your people, like how are you trying to uncover like their stories or how they view the world? You can't even talk to them about certain issues. Again, like I guess if you wanted to refer back to like the Imperial Yang case, a lot of young Asians who were on the side of like Akai, which I like to call the side of justice, but that's a biased opinion. A lot of them couldn't communicate with their parents, and their parents were the ones who were going out to these rallies to support Officer Yang. And how do you have that conversation if you don't have the basis of language to like glue you guys together?